it was scary at the time to be mentioning the word laser and what the concerns and what is this laser doing and is it going to be hurting me? Is it cancerous? All those
Yeah.
concerns that existed at the time were real then.
Welcome to Behind the Shelf, a podcast about how everyday products are made. My name is Amar.
My name is Tarek, and we are your hosts.
Today we're going to talk about something very special, barcodes. This is a special episode. We're going to deviate a little from what we normally talk about, how we talk about products and stuff, but we're going to talk about what's on those products. I want to talk about barcodes. Tarek.
I think today will be a pretty interesting episode because obviously barcodes are used anywhere and everywhere, and from a first glance they all look the same. So it'll be interesting to kind of go into that, understand how they were built and why they were built, and then talk about what they mean. Can you read them
Yeah, and,
yourself?
and to a normal shopper, right? You're going to see them, but you're not going to know what it is. And even if you know what it is, it doesn't matter to the consumer. But for the system that's in play, for the retailer, it is very important because that's how checkout happens. That's how movement of the product happens. And so tell us one thing. How did it all start? What was like the starting point of, hey, I'm gonna create barcodes?
You may already know this, but it's not the Mesopotamians at this point for the something like the
What?
barcodes. So I am sad to share
The
that
ancient Egyptians didn't make barcodes? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
pharaohs did not have barcode technology, unfortunately. However, they did start around the 1940s, and what was happening at the time is a lot of supermarkets were growing, and not only growing in size only, but also growing in there as a chain. So you'll have multiple locations. So as that growth was happening, there was a lot of complexity coming into the supply chain for those grocery store. So all the products that they have into their warehouses and then sorted into their warehouses and then to their respective stores, that became increasingly complex as the supermarkets grew. So barcodes came as a solution to solve the issue with inventory management and tracking. And like I mentioned, specifically in the store, how do you track the pricing of the material, the inventory of what you have in that store, and then the checkout of that store when that item leaves your inventory? So barcodes came to solve that inefficiency that existed in the grocery store and in the supply chain of the grocery industry in general.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But like what started it? Like what was the first conversation or who was the first person to say, "Okay, I think we need to create a solution for this problem."
It was actually an executive for one of those supermarkets that went to Drexel University in Pennsylvania and kind of talked to the dean of the university, and he was like, "Hey, man, we need some help here in that industry. There is a lot of
Uh-huh.
manual labor that is going into our labeling because before barcodes existed in an individual grocery store, they would have to label every individual item with the price that it should be sold at. So when you're checking it out, the clerk at the checkout, they would see that number and they would just key it in manually. So if it's a banana for 92 cents, they would key in 0.92 cents for every single item they have to do. So you can imagine the amount of labor that went into labeling the stuff and then at the checkout, keying in those individual digits. And with everything else, you also can think of the human error that would happen. Instead of doing
Yeah,
a
yeah.
2.9, you're doing a 2.8 or doing a 2.7. And that aggregates quite a bit when you're talking about a supermarket that is very large.
Yeah.
So that supermarket executive went to Drexel University, talked to the dean about helping him and the overall industry find a solution for this. And frankly, the dean was not even interested. He was like, "Don't waste my time, bro. Get the hell out of here."
So why Drexel? Like why out of all the universities go to Drexel?
It was the university that was close to that supermarket where that
Oh, gotcha.
executive was working and had a lot of their locations. So he
Okay.
went to that university and asked the dean. The dean was not interested. But luckily for humanity, really, that one person was listening over to that conversation, and his name was Bernard Silver. To this day, he is considered one of the founders of the barcode technology. Bernard
Oh,
Silver at the
okay.
time was a graduate at that university, and he listened to this problem and he kind of was intrigued by it. So he shared it with another founder associated with Barcodes, which is Norman Woodland. They started chatting about it as two graduates in the university, and then from there they started developing a potential solution.
So so these two guys, right? They were graduates. What did they graduate in? What were their jobs? Like what were they doing that they could be like, okay, I'm gonna jump into this barcode game?
So both of them were graduates at the university when they started working on that idea. Bernard Silver had a degree in electrical engineering from Drexel University, and Norman had a degree in mechanical engineering. But he was also teaching at that university, hence why they exist, like they were in that environment. When that
Oh,
idea came up, Norman tapped into his past experience in the military. So he was part in the World War II. He was part of the Manhattan Project, the project that developed the nuclear bomb in the US.
uh-huh.
So he had experience with Morse code. So his early versions, as they were ideating on how to create a barcode, was from the Morse code. So if you're not familiar with Morse codes, it's essentially a series of dots and dashes that resemble specific letters. So every specific sequence of dots and dashes resembles a letter, and then you can combine them and you can then construct letters into words. So he tapped into that experience that he had from the military to create the early versions of barcode.
That makes sense. The Morse code, with the tapping and the sequencing and all that. I mean, that makes sense, right? To transition over, trying to get that to capture product info, whatever the simplistic version was at that time. That makes a lot of sense.
And it was a technology that was already in place and it was already tested heavily by the
Yeah.
military, not only the US military obviously, but everyone else across the globe. So it was already familiar to him and also to the whole industry, if you will, and the whole area. So it wasn't a huge shift for them to kind of start from that. Now, the early versions of the barcode looked like a bullseye, actually. It didn't look like a series of stripes like it does now. It was
Uh-huh.
similar, however, in that it had some of those round circles, if you will, within the bullseye. Some of them were thin, some of them were thick, similar to how a barcode is, but it was a round shape. And they developed it in the late 1940s. So I think it was like around so it was around 1948. However, the problem they faced was that the technology that existed at the time didn't allow them to actually test it or even commercialize it.
So they were doing these dots, right? Did they have like scanning capability? Because just having the dots, you would have to manually read them, right? You would have to manually decode. So
Yeah,
what was their
it wasn't
solution
dots.
behind the solution?
So it wasn't dots. It was like a bullseye. It was like a target sign. But the technology at the time didn't allow them to even commercialize. So they had to actually just wait for 2 decades for the technology. They waited from
Wow.
1948 when they actually created this to about
Uh-huh.
1960 to when
Wow.
the technologies that they needed, mainly their semiconductor, so the computers, the chips that are used at the time, picked up until that happened around 1958. They matured enough to be able to handle taking that data, decoding it, and interpreting it into a product number or a product code that can be used, along with the laser technology that took up
Mhm.
until the 1960s. So the laser technology needed to actually mature to be able to use in such a small environment. So you're not talking about a very bulky, heavy equipment, but also reliably enough that you can use it on a massive scale like a supermarket. You're scanning every single
Yeah.
item.
So the guy, the executive that came with the kind of proposal, he didn't see anything for 20 years.
Probably not. He planted the seed and then went on for future generations to actually see the
He would have
benefit.
been so sad. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. He may have seen it. I don't know if he was alive until then, but
Yeah.
he didn't benefit from it up until 20 years later. And that's 20 years up until the technology evolved. So it's not that this is when it actually happened. Now, the other thing that's worth mentioning as we get to this to the 60s is that in parallel to this, in the freight industry, so in the rail tracks and in the
Right.
train and freight industry, there was a similar technology that was being developed in 1967 that was trialed, but it didn't see a lot of success. It was called a car track technology, essentially. It was a set of lines of different color that would be mounted on every rail cart on every train in the US. And the point is, as they pass certain scanning stations, the scanners would look at those stripes of colors and determine what is that cart and therefore know what's in it. And that would obviously help them track it, where it is, and which location it has made it to. That
So given
technology,
that we didn't transition into it, what was the fault? Like what happened? Why didn't we pursue that?
that was created mainly for the railroad industry, and it was bulky. So those stripes that we're talking about, they're big, made for that industrial setting. One, two, they would get dirty all the time, and the scanners would not
Mm,
read them, and it just became a pain to maintain and manage, and they just got abandoned. Like they lasted for
yeah,
like
that
three
makes
years, and
sense.
then even the railroad industry abandoned them because they just were not really reliable enough.
Okay, yeah,
So
that makes sense.
skip forward to about 1972 is when the technology of the barcode, again, we're still with this bullseye shape. It got into the first grocery store. It was a Kroger's grocery store. They pitched that idea to them, and Kroger's CEO was open to trialing it at a specific store in Cincinnati, Ohio. And they were nervous about it at the beginning, especially like from a Kroger standpoint. They were nervous about it because you're telling consumers about this lasers you're going to be using. You think about those sci-fi movies that they had, and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
all this. It was scary at the time to be mentioning the word laser, and what the concerns of what is this laser doing, and is it going to be hurting me? Is it cancerous? All those
yeah, yeah,
concerns that existed at the time were real then, and Kroger was worried about it, but they still tried it in one singular location, and they noticed that people actually loved it because it made the checkout process for people a lot faster and a lot more efficient. And obviously, the
right.
clerks and people who are working there also loved it. So, with that success, that technology started to kind of get more popular. So, you started to see some companies that pop up in that industry, and each of them had their own standard. So, the grocery industry was like, whoa, whoa, we got to create a standard. In order for this to work, we need a singular standard that everyone follows. Otherwise, it's going to be a pain to manage and have different standards, different barcodes mean
Yeah.
different things. So created what we call now the GS1, which is a committee that essentially manages the barcode standards. They created it and they manage it to this day. They do improvements and so on.
So was it like a group of individuals that patented the barcode and then said, "Hey, grocery store, would you like to jump on board and use this system?" How did that kind of implementation work? How did people get onto this?
From a grocery store perspective, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So ever since this technology even became into existence, it was kind of targeted at the grocery stores because that's when most of the issues were obvious. So at the grocery store, like I mentioned, you have to tag the numbers, every single individual item, and then you have to key it in. So a lot of the noise on who needed this the most was coming from the owners of those grocery stores and the CEOs and the executives from that industry.
Okay.
So that industry was hurting the most. And then eventually, as it became popular and proved itself as a technology, then it spread out across the board everywhere you see. And even to this day, it is focused on packaged goods. So it is still kind of concentrated in that area, but it's no longer just in a grocery store setting.
So it wasn't just one person or a group of people. It was just a collective evolution of technology that everyone kind of developed in silos for their own specific customers.
It was a set of companies. It was a few like consumer electronics companies, things like Radio Shack and things like that.
Rest in
So
peace.
yeah, Radio Shack doesn't exist anymore, right?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, they
The
died.
source kind of took it over. I don't know if you have the source down there, but
Yeah, the well, Amazon's probably for us.
yeah,
I
Amazon's
remember,
everywhere.
yeah, I remember seeing them, like hearing the news about them dying, but I haven't listened to that, like what happened to them. I mean, I haven't seen a Radio Shack store in a really long time, so that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
All
So
right. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
so the grocery industry, if you will, created a committee that is essentially now the GS1 committee that made a standard that everyone would follow. And they went through a bidding process. So they had different companies, whether that's a consumer electronics company or a IBM was in there, RCA, which is a consumer electronics, and then
Yeah.
some other companies that also proposed their ideas and their technologies. It was that committee's decision to go with IBM's technology is what made it to
Okay.
what it is right now. So the technology that we are familiar with in barcodes to this day is IBM's
Yeah.
technology. And the engineer that's usually credited for it is called George Laurer. So shout out to him.
Nice. Yeah. He did well.
He did well. He made a pretty good technology. And we're gonna cover what like how why is that such an impressive and reliable technology in a little bit. But I think it's interesting to see how a technology that's now, what, 60, 70, 60 years old, it is still
Yeah.
dominant to this day and is still used. There are variations of it, but it is still very popular and it's pretty much used unchallenged.
Yeah. So with GS1, being now a global identified standard and standard maintenance nonprofit company, how, or should I say, what formats exist now? What is popular? Kind of give us background in that before you go into how the system works. Tell us what system there is now.
So, actually, before we get into that, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you care to guess when that technology matured and actually standardized? What is the first item they ever scanned with this existing barcode technology? So, not the Bullseye, a barcode. You're,
Huh.
we covered this in a previous episode, so just giving you a hint.
Yes. It has to be at like near the checkout, so something small. Chocolate bar.
Very close. No, it was a gum. It was a Wrigley
Gum.
gum.
Wrigley.
It was a Wrigley gum. It was June 26, 1974. It was the first item that was scanned ever with this new barcode technology that we're familiar with now was a Wrigley chewing gum. So shout out to Wrigley, shout out
There
to
we go.
IBM, and we're just to this day scanning the same stuff. Now,
Nice, nice.
back to your question about what variations currently exist. So the words that you usually hear or the terminologies that you hear in that space, there's like EIN, which is European Article Number. There's G10, which
Right.
is a global trade item number. And there's UPC, which is Universal Product Code. Frankly, they all pretty much mean very, very similar things. They're all codes that help you identify a specific item by scanning
Right.
that barcode. Now, the level of information that each of those will give you is different. So the UPC is usually the kind of the most focused. That's the one that is closest to the initial barcode technology that we just talked about. And that one essentially gives you information about who made that product and then what is that product. So if you're talking about, let's say you have a Vaseline lotion, for example,
Yeah.
the first half of it will tell you this is made by the Vaseline company, and the second half it will tell you it is aloe vera 5 ounce lotion. So it tells
Sure.
you
Yeah.
exactly what that is.
So the barcode on, let's say, you're gonna use your Vaseline example, right? The barcode on actual unit, the stuff that the consumer is gonna buy, that barcode, that barcode is called the UPC.
Correct.
Okay.
That is a UPC. That's the Universal Product Code.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And along with that, you have G10 and the EIN one. So G10, there's like G10 8, 12, 13, and 14. And
Okay.
what essentially, these are international versions of that barcode. So they are recognized internationally. They are actually sometimes required for international retailers. So think like Amazon, Alibaba, stores that sell products internationally, they would require those for their products because of their reach, obviously. So another thing to keep in mind is that the difference between a G10 and a UPC is that UPC is essentially what we associate barcodes with. They are mostly common in North America only, but also they are very specific to products that you buy, usually specific physical products that you buy. So grocery store related things like milk and whatever it might be. However, GTIN, not only does it have that information, but it also encompasses wider range of products or services. So if you're looking at an Amazon package or a UPS package, that would be a GTIN. So it would give you information associated with shipments, or if a company offers software services. So I'm buying like a consultancy service, or I'm buying something like a translation or something like that, something that is not
Mm-hmm.
physical and tangible. They would be using a GTIN. A barcode would not work. The other thing
Okay,
to
so
keep
the
in mind,
G10 is more versatile, basically.
the GTIN is more versatile, more universal, and it's more broad in its
Okay.
in the information it provides. And within it, you can also add that barcode information, so that UPC information, in addition to other things that you might need as a seller.
So the barcodes that you talk about, right? The common GS1, whatever the format the grocery stores or the product manufacturer applies. How does that whole system work? What happens? Like what's behind the scenes?
Yeah, so we'll focus on the UPC one because that's the most popular one that we see in the store and for the things that we buy. So when you're scanning the barcode with a laser, those strips of black and white will reflect the light back to that scanner differently. So black naturally will absorb the light, so nothing will get
Right.
reflected. And then white will reflect the light more, and that gets reflected and gets read into the scanner. Now, the scanner actually obviously detects that and then helps it read the barcodes into a set of ones and zeros. So computers in general, and this scanner as well, understand everything in binary. So everything gets translated to ones and zeros, all the letters and the numbers that we are
Yeah.
familiar with. So that barcode gets translated into 95 ones and zeros. Those are then broken down into 15 sections. 3 of those sections are used as guardrails, if you will. There's a left and a right and a center. And that help give a structure to the barcode when the scanner scans it, to tell it when the barcode ends and when it starts, and then what is the central divider that is then used for other purposes.
Right.
So after that, the remaining, we talked about 15 sections, 3 being guards. The remaining 12, the 6 to the left of the barcode, are used to help identify what type of product and what is the manufacturer code is. So is it a standard off-the-shelf product, or is it a weighted item? So if you're buying a pound of meat from the butcher in the grocery store, it'll have a 2 on it. So that's a very left digit that you see on the barcode. It's kind of standing alone on its own. That's a 2 if it's a meat product or something that has a weight associated with it. It's a 0 if it's a standard from the shelf. So that's the first one. And then the 5 after it is associated with the manufacturer code. So every manufacturer and every company has its own code that this number, this 5-digit number, will tell the scanner whose that is. So if we're talking about Vaseline earlier, so that will tell it, oh, it's the Vaseline company and it's owned by Unilever. And then the second half of it is associated with the actual SKU. So 5 of those digits will be associated with, oh, that's the aloe vera 5-ounce Vaseline, specifically
Yeah.
telling you
Yeah.
what it is. And then the last one is associated with, it's called like it's a check. It's a check character. So it ensures that it read everything else correctly, and it does some mathematical calculation inside that scanner to verify that the number it yields is equal to that check number. And if they do equal, then it read the barcode correctly, and it knows that everything is good.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And then I'm assuming once the system reads it, it automatically takes it out of their inventory.
Exactly. So after that information gets broken down, now it knows, okay, in my inventory, I should subtract a quantity of 1 or 2 or 3, whatever, of that
Right.
specific barcode, and it helps maintain the inventory. That's why you'll see a lot of the times, sometimes their inventory doesn't get up to date. And that is actually a real problem right now in grocery stores, where the clerks may scan the product wrong, because sometimes the barcode is kind of mushed up or it's too wet. Say you're buying a bunch
Yeah.
of parsley, for example. So like it's wet and the barcode is very small and the system can't scan it. And they would just either enter it manually and have a typo in it, or they just put something similar to it, like a cilantro versus a parsley. So that remains an issue with items that have a tiny barcode, like a banana, like a cilantro, and things like that, something like that. But it obviously significantly improves the traceability of when it was sold and who it was sold to, and then also just updating the inventory of what's in stock.
That's an important thing you brought up is traceability. And a lot of times, it's very important, not a lot of times, always, nowadays, important to know the full supply chain of whatever the consumer is consuming. In case anything is wrong, you can trace all the way back to the farm. And, solutions like these with the barcodes has really helped traceability because you can just look it up, put the G10 or product info in, and you know exactly where it went, who took it out, where it came from, and then who the manufacturer was, and you could backpedal all the way through.
Exactly. And this is most useful during recalls. So in recalls right now, when you see a specific product recall, you'll see a general announcement to tell people. But actually, if they want to take this a step further, if they actually track the information further, those manufacturers can work with the grocery stores and use the data that tells them who bought this product within that time period, and then message those specific people or send them a letter or email them if they have that email on record. So they can actually take
Yeah,
it that level of granularity on who I can notify about my recall. But generally the easiest way, because now you're getting into information sharing and privacy and things like that.
yeah,
So they just blast it as a public announcement. So recently there was a Boar's Head recall on some of their deli meat made in a specific
hmm,
factory of theirs. So it
yeah,
impacted specific product made at a specific factory. So that barcode helps them know, using that lot code as well, helps them know exactly where that product is made and when it was made. So that information is obviously how they know, okay, these are the specific lot numbers or the specific barcodes that
yeah.
we want to notify the people about.
Makes sense. Makes so much sense, and it helps. Not only the retailers, manufacturers, but also the consumers, because now you can feel rest assured if anything happens, it can be traced.
Do
The
you know
whole
you bought
system.
it? For
Yeah,
better or for
yeah,
worse?
exactly. Exactly. So, Tark, we went through the evolution of the barcode, which started from two individuals that had to wait 20 years for technology to catch up to their revolutionary idea of let's put some stripes on a white blank canvas that holds a lot of information and allows for product inventory and product traceability. Skip ahead a bit, and now we're in this society globally connected by certain barcodes, and a lot of barcodes follow a GS1 format. And you talked about that committee and how that was set up, and how the system is able to recognize what it's scanning and instantly know, okay, this is a standard item that is from, let's say, on this manufacturer, the product info, and right away, as soon as you put it in your cart, in the back end system knows, okay, take it out of inventory. And it makes everyone's lives easier, and you don't have to sit there as a consumer waiting for someone to type key all the stuff in. So the whole world has changed, and changed for the better. And I'm glad we went through this. I know the special episode we wanted to just go through is we went through so many products. We figured let's do a little break. Let's talk about some of the nitty gritty things you may have seen, but you may not have known what it's all about. And so thank you, Tarek, for bringing us through all of that. And with that, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you liked this, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, share on your socials, and as always, let us know how we can get better. And with that, my name is Amar.
And my name is Tarek. Have a wonderful rest of your day.